Well, hello. My goodness, it's amazing to see so many of you here today. I have a feeling that this is a larger audience than the audience we hosted in London in 2019 for the last Cyber Threat Intelligence Symposium. So I'm delighted, really excited to be here with you all, and really excited to see this level of interest in this really important topic. I'm James Chappell. I founded a cybersecurity company, or threat intelligence company called Digital Shadows about 10 years ago in 2011. And my goodness, it's been an interesting journey. We learned some things along the way. Also, for my sins, I'm one of the co-chairs of the Cyber Threat Intelligence SIG here at First. So if you want to know more about that, come and see us at noon. And then thirdly, I got involved in some regulatory work a while ago. So some of you here might be familiar with a program called Tiber EU or CBEST. It was a really interesting program set up by the banks, looking at how red teaming was really relevant to the resilience of financial institutions. And one of the questions they ask is, how can observations about threat support the work of red teams to justify, prove the actions these highly skilled red teams were taking to test the resilience of banks? How can we prove what those teams are doing are actually based in reality, based in real threats? That was a really interesting opportunity, and I made some learnings along the way. So today, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the experience picked up on this journey. I'm sure everybody has different experience. This is not necessarily the only set of experience along that journey. It's not quite 10 years, it's actually 11, but I'm sure you'll let me off 1 year. The way I'm going to approach this today, we're going to start with some definitions. Then I'm going to talk about the origins of our profession. Where does intelligence come from originally? What does this discipline mean, and how did we get here in the first place? I want to talk about some of the evolution that's occurred over the last 10 years, and some meaningful evolution has occurred, I'm sure you'll all agree. And then look at contemporary cyber threat intelligence. What does it mean to us today? And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the future as well. So let's get started with some definitions. There isn't a dictionary definition of cyber threat intelligence as far as I can understand yet, but I'm going to share with you some of the things that have helped me to understand it as a topic. Who here can remember a very waffly phrase by Donald Rumsfeld? There are known knowns, there's things we know, the things that we know we don't know, and there's things we don't know we don't know. It was probably one of the worst sort of descriptions of intelligence in the world, but it did do some really interesting things. It divided the world up into things we understand and really can say, what they mean to us. There's a set of things that we know we don't know enough about, that we need to learn more about to be better at understanding them. And there's a bunch of stuff completely left of field that it's just going to hit us, and we won't be expecting it. If we think about the number of events in cybersecurity where things have come left of field, there's been some pretty big ones, right? Remember WannaCry? I was chatting to someone over breakfast. Not a lot of us were expecting that to happen. And I think, for me, the role of intelligence is to try and get ahead of events like that. Try to better forecast better outcomes for organizations. I quite like a definition of this guy. Is a gentleman called Sir David Omand. He used to be the head of GCHQ for a number of years. And he describes the purpose of intelligence as improving the quality of decision-making by reducing ignorance. Now, what he's not saying everyone's stupid. What he's saying by ignorance is there's things we don't understand, and if we can reduce the number of things we don't understand, we can take more effective actions. And I think that's a sort of a useful way to think about the sort of traditional form of intelligence that we've seen in the world. And you've probably seen these pyramid diagrams before with sort of data, information, knowledge. Sometimes you see wisdom on the top of this diagram as well. So data being the facts that we record, information being those facts with some context. Where did you get it from? What was it used from? How did I learn of this? What does it mean in the broader world? And then knowledge is when you apply that information. Intelligence sort of occupies that space between data, information, and knowledge. It's facts that we can use to further an outcome. In our profession, that outcome is reducing harm to organisations. As part of that security testing framework, I worked with a bunch of other cyber threat intelligence providers, and we were set the task of coming up with a one-sentence definition of cyber threat intelligence. This is where we landed up. So we said, cyber threat intelligence is information about threats and threat actors that provide sufficient, so enough, understanding to mitigate a harmful event in the cyber domain. Okay, so it's a sentence with probably more words than most would like, but I think this idea of understanding things so you can stop bad stuff from happening to people is really, really important. And as we're all practitioners in cybersecurity, this has been a sort of definition that served me quite well in the past. So where did all of this come from? What are the origins of all of this? Well, I went back through the history books. The earliest reference I can find at the moment, I hope to learn more from you as well, but the earliest reference I can find is actually in 69 AD. There was a group of couriers, interestingly, called the Frumentari, who served under the Domitian Empire of the Roman the Roman Empire, and they used to go and collect grain, collect taxes, and occasionally assassinate people, because that's what they do. So they sort of. But the interesting thing about them is they were in all of the provinces of the Roman Empire, and they were able to report back to the emperor what was happening in each of the regions, so that the Roman emperor could plan better his actions of state. And this is the earliest recorded, in the 69 AD, they changed their function into an intelligence service, literally like a spooky sort of intelligence service. And this is the earliest reference I can find to that. So ever since then, in militaries and in sort of security practices in governments, we've seen this type of function take place. And I think some of the ideas of trying to reduce uncertainty is what was led to this being set up. But of course, in cyber threat intelligence, we have to wait a little. We have to wait for computers to be invented, have to wait for our time to protect things. And actually here, at first, was a presentation made in 2004 by Ian Cook. Some of you will know Ian was on the board of FIRST for a while. And in Budapest in 2004, we presented a presentation about how can you use intelligence in a corporate security program. And it's a really interesting, I've supplied the link, the slides will be available afterwards. It's worth having a look at, sort of just as a retrospective, to see, actually there's a number of, reducing uncertainty about cyber threats is a really important thing. And he saw use in that as far as back as 2004. Something I've observed is we've always cared about threat, right? As I've worked in the cybersecurity industry since about 1996. We've always cared about threats. So things like CVE have always existed. We've always cared about, many of you here are from computer emergency response teams or their predecessors, warning and reporting points. We've been collecting information about the bad for ages. And it's kind of interesting when cyber threat intelligence started to be used more as a term. It's kind of everything we already did had a home, and everything old is new again in some way. But that's okay. That should be all right. We should always be understanding threat. That's kind of something we've always done as a profession. But from this point, it kind of evolves a fair bit. We've learned a lot on that journey. So some of you will be familiar with the term fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And I think when I think back to 10 years ago, when we thought about threat, it was kind of like chasing ghosts. You know, you've got to try and understand, you've got to try and fathom something that was really quite unfathomable, except for the folks who've done a lot of forensics on one particular actor, who they understand in a lot of detail. But that broader picture was it's very difficult to get a hold of. And I often spoke to security leaders or leaders of organizations about, well, what are you doing about the threats to your business? And so often they said, oh, it just feels like I'm chasing something I can't define. I'm almost chasing a ghost, it seems. And that wasn't really helped very much by the sort of the marketing in the cybersecurity industry as well, because that fear was leveraged to sell product, which is never a good thing. We really want to be able to talk in real terms about those threats, and the way the commercial conversation was happening was not happening in a helpful way. And that made that really difficult for practitioners like us to progress. It's telling that one of the first sort of proper reports around this, now I just caveat this slightly, so I think malware research has done a fantastic job over time, and it is decades old in terms of its disciplines, right back to the cuckoo's egg and Clifford Stoll, right? So I think we've understood things like malware at a technical level really, really well. But what I'm really interested in is, when does this dialogue make it out into the public domain? And I think it's quite telling that one of the first sort of big, broad reports on this topic had the term GhostNet as its title, that idea of chasing ghosts. This was a bit of work by the University of Toronto. Ron Diebert, I'm sure many of you have heard about, did a study on the Dalai Lama's sort of IT network, and published a report called GhostNet, which sort of detailed his findings, or the team's findings. So it's the SecDev group and the Monk Centre for International Affairs worked together under the auspices of the Information Warfare Monitor to produce this report. And it was really interesting. It was the first sort of description of a global coordinated action around threat. And for me, it was really interesting because it was in the New York Times. It became a big feature article in the New York Times. And the report opens with the statement, "This report will pose more questions than it answers." And I think it was sort of started to create a dialogue about the fact there are global level activities and campaigns that affect organizations. So for me, this is a very important moment in the evolution of threat intelligence. People actually starting to write down how this stuff behaves. Just the next year, Google announced that they'd been breached. And the blog on the right-hand side here, which is called A New Approach to China, coined the name of Operation Aurora. And that affected 12 corporate entities, 5 of which wrote their own blogs about their experience online. It was a fascinating conversation. And again, I think this is quite an important moment in threat intelligence, because suddenly, prior to these sorts of announcements, it was very rare for an organization or a company to explain that they'd been breached. And they'd been breached by a more sophisticated approach, or an approach that hadn't previously been observed at scale. And we got some real insight. And I think for me, this was a really important moment, because it suddenly changed how acceptable it was for organizations to talk about this type of threat. And I think probably one of the big problems that we've worked together on is to have it be acceptable to talk about threat to one another in a public domain. And this is a good example of it. So it made a big difference. It would be remiss of me not to mention probably one of the first proper cyber threat intelligence reports, the Mandiant APT-1 report. It was I think this report kind of set the standard in terms of talking about the geographies, the people, and then collecting together useful facts about particular coordinated actions. Now, I think it took a while to compile this. There was some kind of forensic study. An output was produced at the end of it, which then helped gain better insight into the threat actors. Those threat actors had probably long since changed their behaviours by the time this was published, although some of it can be found historically. But this was really important. It kind of set the standard for how you collate information together about a threat. And it really is, a very well-written report, I believe. Who here has heard of the Pyramid of Pain? Come on, everyone put your hands up. Like, everybody's heard of the Pyramid of Pain. So David J. Bianco, he was doing a lot of work in security analytics and looking at consuming data to understand threat in a good way. He observed that things that, like indicators, can be changed quite quickly. It's not expensive for a threat actor to change some of those things. It's much harder for them to change their behaviors and their tools. And actually, it's quite interesting. If you look at indicators, they've been around for a long time. They were around really before sort of 2010. And they've been very, very useful. They're a really important thing. But it is a fact that if it's domains and you're using those in malware, DGA makes domain generation algorithms make a difference there. Polymorphism of sort of the hash, things like file artifacts are now difficult because in memory happens much more. So indicators are really, really valuable, but the argument is that they're also ephemeral or fragile, or they age quickly. And it's really been really interesting to see how this part of our discipline has evolved to get platforms to aggregate, prioritize, assess, and normalize indicators, to see searches going back historically to see whether those indicators were somewhere in our system of record, or enrichment. So in the event of an incident, enriching that incident with useful context. So still valuable, but evolving. In 2014, we saw advanced persistent marketing make a arrival. So if you went to the RSA show in the US in 2014, you would have seen literally hundreds of vendors saying, well, everything that I've done previously can now be called cyber threat intelligence, therefore buy cyber threat intelligence from us. And that was really tricky because you had security teams trying to make sense of all of that, and it was almost impossible. It wasn't really well understood. One person's cyber threat intelligence didn't mean the same thing as someone else's. That was really difficult for practitioners to navigate. Something that we have seen evolve is the skill sets in producing useful cyber threat intelligence. So on the technical end, we've had sort of malware research, incident response and forensics, and IT security operations, always collaborating. And now we have specialist cyber threat intelligence teams on a technical level. We've also benefited, though, from people who've come from law enforcement intelligence, military intelligence, fraud teams, physical and corporate security teams converge with these teams and bring new practices and new disciplines with them. Good examples of this are things like analytical thinking. So we all have cognitive biases. We all have the ability to jump to conclusions really quickly. And one of the things that has come from the intelligence sector is real analytical techniques that helps us to not jump to conclusions, to make decisions better and more effectively. This is a book by Richard J. Hoyer and Randolph Fersen. They worked in the CIA for a very long time, and they brought concepts of processes to make sure that thinking was done in a critical way, that it was free from cognitive bias, and it took account of all the inputs that came in. Some of you might be familiar with processes like the analysis of competing hypotheses. This is where you're in the middle. I've seen this applied quite well to incidents where you're trying to have hypotheses about how that incident came about, and then aligning the evidence to support one of those hypotheses above the others. And it's that way of structured thinking is really, really valuable. The other thing we've become better at is talking about intelligence requirements. Stakeholders care about things, they have concerns, organizations exist in a vertical, they have assets, they exist in different geographies. We've got way better at understanding requirements, prioritizing them, and then creating intelligence products according to those requirements, and then playing those back to the people that asked for them in the first place, and then getting feedback on that whole thing. That discipline is really, really valuable and something we're all way, way better at than we used to be. I think the other really core objective, and I think this is a very important theme for this entire conference, is getting before the bang. So in intelligence, we often talk about what's in the news, and all of us will be familiar with that situation where someone in a management team goes, I've seen the news, I've seen this threat, why aren't you telling me about this? And intelligence has to be faster than that news article, absolutely every time. So whether that's picking it up from researchers before it hits the news, whether that's looking at other incident response, whether it's through groups like FIRST, learning from others' experiences, it's really important to get as far left of that bad event as we can. And we've already been doing it for a while. We've had risk assessments, threat modeling, really important for that. I think where we really need to invest is understanding things like precursors. So what are the things that tell us that something is about to happen? There's quite a lot of useful study on things like Active Directories and how Active Directories are interacted with. If you can spot those behaviors up front, you can make a difference to something bad down the line. But I think aligning intelligence around getting left of that bang is really important. I think we're getting there. Some of the things like the MITRE framework, for example, understanding behaviors helps us look at sort of earlier in the attack chain. That's really useful for getting left of that bang. So where are we today? Well, I think we understand better the reasons why we do cyber threat intelligence. We do it for detection. We're better at finding things before they become a problem. We're better at investigating. So when we do an investigation, getting context to then speed up the process of getting to the bottom of an issue. And then we're better at response. We're getting mitigations in place faster with more confidence than ever before. But there's other more strategic reasons, whether it's prioritizing budgets, working out what the business case for implementing cybersecurity is. I think we're better now explaining to non-technical, non-cyber folks what the risk is and actually putting that together in real terms. We've come an enormous way forward in that space. I've seen some really exciting things around measuring the effectiveness of a cybersecurity program using intelligence as the input. And again, this is a really good progression. It's using real evidence of real attacks. We're no longer chasing ghosts. The products that we produce are better understood. So we've now seen more examples of products than we ever have before. So by stakeholder, by need, by use, by cadence, we understand these products better than before. There's some really great work yesterday on threat landscapes. You were in those workshops, and sort of understanding things like the briefs, the actor profiles, tippers, or indicator feeds with context, vulnerabilities, things like vulnerability intelligence, which is becoming more of a thing now. We've got a better understanding of what we want from those products. That's really good. It's really good that we're seeing those things. And use cases are better understood. Again, this is not an exhaustive list, but there's literally 20, 30 different disciplines in applying cyber threat intelligence in an environment. Incredibly useful that we have this level of understanding, not just at the technology level, but at the tactical and strategic levels of business. Incredibly valuable stuff. So if I was to write a report card of the last 10 years, I could look at what went well and what could be better. I think what's gone really well is we are way better at describing threat than we ever have been, and certainly way better than the preceding decade. We now understand threat actors in a level of detail that could only be dreamed of 10 years ago, and I'm really, really excited about where that's gone. We're no longer chasing ghosts. We're now we're now really understanding the threat in a lot more detail. There are still things that will happen right of bang that we didn't know about, but we're getting better at understanding those unknowns. We've created, probably one of the most valuable things, is we've created this language of uncertainty. If we can say we're not certain about something, we can then go and investigate it. We can then go and learn more about it. If we understand where those gaps are, not only do we as practitioners have something we can go after, but we can also communicate that uncertainty to our customers, the people that we serve. So I think that's been a really important thing to be able to describe when we're not certain. We have fantastic beginnings of the lingua franca of threat. So things like MITRE and STIX have been enormously helpful in helping us describe threat and for us to utilize those descriptions in meaningful ways. And we've welcomed new colleagues from across different disciplines who've really contributed to our profession, really made a huge difference to the way that we do things. So there's a lot to be very proud of over the last 10 years. But we've got some things that we need to do better too. I think it's not realistic for every organisation to stand up a cyber threat intelligence team. I think that objective is laudable, but not realistic for organisations that aren't big industrial companies or aren't tier one banks or aren't at the level of government. I think we've got to find a way for security teams who are one or two people in an enterprise to consume the types of products that we produce. We also still lack consistency in the way that we do things. There's lots of opportunity for being more consistent. It was great to see examples like the MISP Galaxy, for example, where we're bringing together the naming conventions for different threat actors. But there's still more work to be done. We've got to get better at that consistency. And we're not yet before the bang entirely. We've got some things that are allowing us to forecast. Some of those precursor actions are quite helpful, but there's more I think we can do to get before the bang and to forecast more effectively. So let's look to the future. I don't have a crystal ball. If I did, and I could predict with 100% accuracy, I would be in the betting shop making a lot of money. So I can't do that. But I can forecast, but I shouldn't forecast like John's weather forecasting stone, where, the current situation dictates the future. But what can we say? Well, we can base a forecast on the needs, we can base it on the trends in our industry, and we can base it on the environment within which we sit. And I can have an educated guess based on those things. So what are our drivers? Well, there's the need to make better use of our resources. There's the need to get left of bang. There's the trends towards consolidation. And there's the threat environment, which continues to develop at pace, at a speed that we're trying to hold on and catch up to. So where are we going? Well, we're definitely reducing the times from seeing something happen to then making use of that observation in a meaningful way for our organisations. That we're going to carry on seeing that time reduce. We're getting more effective at doing that. We're definitely moving towards a better encoded description of threat behaviour to develop precursor collections, to work out what we can learn ahead of a bad thing happening. And I think we're getting better at that. I think removing humans from the loop of that process is one of the things that would help us. We can't do that at the expense of good quality outputs. Groups such as this, our ability to share with our peers and to put things into global repositories really make a difference. And I'm really encouraged to see what we've done to date. We've got a lot further to go, but I'm confident we'll see more of that sharing. I think we're seeing the consolidation of practices in cybersecurity generally, and I think we're going to see intelligence become a component of overall things like security operations or incident response as we go forward. And I really think automation holds the key to some of this. I really do think we have some brilliant opportunities that are given to us by automation. So, in conclusion, cyber threat intelligence continues to be a useful way to describe our capabilities that we already had to better understand threat, but it's really focused on getting better at that and focused on threats in a really meaningful way. And we've greatly benefited from innovation, the professionalism in this room, the focus, the thoughtful convergence of disciplines and skills to significantly improve us all. And it's needed by everyone. There's not one cybersecurity team in the world that doesn't need cyber threat intelligence. And I think we're struggling to deliver that to everyone, but this room has a vibrant community of people who can really, really make that difference. So I'm really excited about the next 2 days. Thanks so much for coming along and listening to me today. I'm really excited about your ideas for taking this to the next level over the next few years. Thank you very much.
We have time for one question?
Yeah, sure.
So I think we have time for one question. So if anyone has a question for James, there are microphones. Then I would ask a question. What would you recommend to a person who is here and has no threat intelligence team at their entity? How should they get started? Just go for a commercial vendor, or what would you recommend?
I think there's plenty of free experiences you can start with. You don't necessarily have to go and buy a capability. I think things like MISP is a good place to start on the technical side. I think just familiarizing yourself with researchers and threat intelligence analysts on the internet. I still find Twitter, even under its new ownership, a good source of information. So, it's a good place to go. I'd absolutely start there.
Cool. Thank you very much.